Hello and welcome to another episode of the Transportation Exchange podcast presented by Rush Truck Centers of Canada. I'm your host, Jason Cuddy. On today's episode, we welcome back again Mr. Mike Millian from the PMTC. Mike, welcome back to the podcast.
Good to see you again, Jason. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, we like to have you back. There's always stuff going on. And we're learning a lot from the OEMs and vendors as far as, product and technology. But there's a lot, maybe it doesn't come across in my world, but that impacts, everyone within the industry as far as, what's going on, new regulations, what's happening on this side of the border. There's lots kind of to talk about since, the last time we were here. So we thought we'd bring you on, get an overview of what's happening in the industry as a whole. And then plus, give us up to speed on kind of what's going on with the PMTC and different things. And you guys just finished up your annual conference a few months ago.
Yeah. So the conference was June in Hamilton, Ontario. We moved to the Hamilton Convention Center this year because we simply were running out of space from the places we were at before. We had record attendance, 298 people registered to attend. Nice. We had 63 sponsors, 50 exhibitors, which sold out in February. So the numbers were all great again, records for everything. Content was good. Of course, we got to add some drivers into our Hall of Fame for professional drivers. We put 4 more of those in, some private fleet safety awards, all the good stuff and the networking that comes around our conference. We are moving next year, though. We were staying in Hamilton for a second year, but in our post-conference survey, unfortunately, people were not fond of the venue, and when we ask for feedback from people and they give it to us, you have to listen. So next year we are moving to the Niagara Falls Convention Center.
Okay.
We'll have room for about the same number of attendees. We can go up to 54 exhibitors, but overwhelmingly people wanted to return to Niagara Falls. So June 18th to 20th of 2024, we'll be back in Niagara Falls, but this time at the Niagara Falls Convention Center.
Gotcha. Excellent. Yeah, I think people like it's a little getaway for some people too, right? I think they'll pack it onto a weekend and make a trip out of it. So
yeah, for sure.
Excellent. And then I know last time we had you on, I guess the last couple of times we've had you on, it's really been to wrap our head around ELDs and kind of what's going on. And I think the last time we chatted, it's coming, and we're here. It works. It's up and running. Maybe kind of give us a summary of, what you're hearing, what you're seeing out there.
Yeah, well, and the ELD seems to be something we never stop talking about, it seems. So it did enforcement finally began on January 1st of 2023 for ELDs. But people still are still not real sure about the regulation. I was on a webinar a couple weeks ago, and there was over 300 people registered for it.
Oh, wow.
So people are still trying to get lots of information about this law. So it is being enforced by every province and territory for federally regulated carriers. It's not being enforced by everybody yet for provincially regulated carriers.
Gotcha.
Newfoundland will begin enforcing for provincial carriers there on December 1st. Nova Scotia will begin enforcing for provincial carriers there on January 1st. Alberta and Saskatchewan have no intentions of enforcing for provincially regulated carriers at this point. PEI doesn't have to, because you only need an ELD if you need a logbook, and you only need a logbook if you're running outside of a 160-kilometer radius. Everybody in the province of PEI that strictly operates within PEI is exempt from it because they are within a 160-kilometer radius.
Makes sense.
So everybody else is enforcing it for federally regulated carriers, and then like the 2 I mentioned. There still has been some issues with it. We have what we call a conviction equivalency table, which basically means if you're a carrier from Ontario and you're pulled over and fined in Alberta, the points that get applied to your carrier safety rating will be the same no matter which jurisdiction you get charged in.
Okay.
Without that table being updated, we're going to have some uneven enforcement, and what that means is you look at the jurisdictions like Alberta and Saskatchewan, for instance, points aren't going to get applied under their carrier safety rating profiles,
right,
if they don't have the law and their regulations. So we have 4 right now where points won't go across. And some provinces will have it in their regs where they put more points against a carrier than another province does. So the conviction equivalency table is a table that all the jurisdictions have agreed to of minimum point values. So the enforcement is kind of the same no matter where you're located and no matter who's charging you. There's only one CET conviction that mentions ELDs and it's operating without an ELD. Okay. There's several other hours of service violations that have to do with an ELD that have to get put into that table. And, the law's been enforced for almost a year now. We're still waiting. So they need to do some work on that. There's some issue with ferry exemption, carriers that go on to Newfoundland. There's an exemption in there that allows a carrier to log themselves or show themselves as off-duty, count a short driving period up to the ferry, the time on the ferry, and a short driving time to get off the ferry. You're allowed to combine those times together and show them as off-duty so you can get on and off the ferry. Gotcha. So the exemption is in the regulations. The problem is it wasn't written into the technical standard. So it shows as driving time, and they can't edit that driving time. So it's actually showing up as violations. So right now it requires the officer to look into it and determine that it's not a violation. So we need to have a fix for that as well. Overall, it's getting better. We had some issues at the start where officers did not either have their codes or didn't know that they required codes to read the logbook information at the side of the road. The information's encrypted. Gotcha. And for an officer to read it, the driver emails it to the officer. It's encrypted. And then the officer has an encryption key, which will allow them to decrypt the logs and read it. And we had some carriers who were getting fined at the start, saying that their device wasn't operating properly, when in fact the device was fine. It was the officer that didn't have the correct information. We were able to get those charges dropped. From what I'm hearing now, I think we've got most of that sorted out. But if carriers do run into issues with that still occurring, I encourage them to reach out to either ourselves or any other contacts they have at associations to try and get the issues handled. But we're getting there. Like anything else, there's going to be hiccups at the start, but it's getting there. But it's far from perfect yet. Yeah, that was to be, like I said, to be expected, right? As it gets rolled out, when it was one thing, you had carriers running it for quite a while, but once it's fully enforced, this is where you find the bugs in the system. But I agree. As you go forward, clearly they're getting worked out. You're finding what they are, and then you kind of smooth it out. So it's nice to see it's finally up and running and slowly getting integrated across. So that's the big thing we always talked about. You've got a whole list of other things that the PMTC has been involved with, directly, that, kind of caught my eye as far as some good talking points that, not necessarily, again, on my radar, but definitely as a carrier, there's definitely things to talk about. So maybe we'll work through a couple of them, but I think one of them was interesting was the temporary foreign worker program. Maybe walk us through kind of what you're seeing there. So the temporary foreign worker program, one thing we've always indicated, I mean, we obviously need immigrant workers to come into this country. We have a labor shortage, not just in the trucking industry, but in all sorts of industries. Right. We rarely don't prefer temporary foreign workers. We want to see temporary foreign workers on a path to permanent residency because the shortage really isn't temporary. True. That's a good point. But an issue we've ran into is the feds and the provinces really not working together that well. So I'm going to stick to the trucking industry. A carrier wants to have temporary foreign workers to fill a position. First thing they have to do is prove that they've tried to fill it with Canadian workers or landed immigrants. If they can't fill it, then they're allowed to apply to get foreign workers to come in and fill this. The federal government approves it, but then they have to communicate with the provinces and territories to make sure that the carrier is operating safely, isn't in violation of any labor laws and practices. And one of the issues we've had is one hand not speaking to the other, and we had people getting approved to hire temporary foreign immigrant workers who never should be anywhere near those types of workers because they were taking advantage of and weren't running safe operations and weren't following fair labor practices. And that's then going to be a bad experience for the person that you're bringing into the country to work. It also affects safety, and it gives them a bad impression of our industry. So they've started ramping up some inspections. Employment and Social Development Canada conducted 2,100 inspections last year. And to be clear, that's not just in the trucking industry. That's to anybody who accesses the temporary foreign worker program. 116 companies were found to be non-compliant. 93. Yeah, 116 found to be non-compliant. 93 were charged with AMPS penalties. A total of $1.4 million in charges. Wow. Well, we still think more needs to be done. Only 7 companies were banned from using the program, despite the violations that they had, and I would say that's too low. Some of the fines, I think the biggest fine we saw was $254,000. Well, is that really enough to determine to have somebody not abuse the program?
Right.
And 5 employers have been banned from using the program for at least 5 years, and that's the stuff we need to see. So it's a starting point. We need more inspections, and we need the penalties to be more strict when these companies are caught. And this going back 4 or 5 years, but I mean, there was a case in Vancouver, BC. A carrier was fined for not paying proper wages to temporary foreign workers. And while they were still in the process of paying that fine, they didn't have it cleared up yet. They were approved to hire more people through the program when they were still paying a fine from unfair labor practices from before. So it sounds like we're starting to get that fixed, but as with anything else, 2,100 inspections, it's just the tip of the iceberg. We need more inspectors out there. It's a starting point, but more needs to be done. We got to make sure we protect all workers, and foreign workers that are coming into this country are generally going to be a lot more vulnerable than people that have lived here their whole life, because they won't know the protections that are available to them yet. They won't know how to access those protections. There could be language barriers. We got to make sure when they're coming in, they're going to carriers and employers who have things set up properly and are not only going to help them with the job, they're going to help integrate them into this country. So we definitely need more inspections to protect workers' rights.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I think, the ones that get violated, obviously they're using it as a way to just get, very, cost-effective labor, for lack of better words, right? And just abusing the system. And, given what the market's been through the last couple of years, rates go down, go up, there's been a lot of moving pieces, equipment's gone up. So, anywhere they can save a few dollars, obviously they're trying to do it. And I agree with you. If the fines aren't significant enough, the savings and the business they may pick up on cheaper labor may still be more profitable than the fines, and the fines may be just a cost of doing business. We've seen this in the past with other regulations where that just becomes a part of your business. You write it in, and until you get shut down, you go with it. So yeah, the more inspections and the more the more regulation you have in place there to kind of control it, the better that program is going to work for everyone involved.
For sure. And like you said, if the fear of being caught isn't high enough, then like you said, it's a cost of doing business. They don't care, because they figure they're gonna make more money by not having to follow the laws that everybody else are following.
Yep.
And unless the risk of getting caught is high enough and the penalties are severe enough, the people that want to act bad are going to keep acting bad until there's enough incentive in place not to act bad.
Agreed. So yeah, it's a good one having on everyone's radar. Another one I noticed as kind of going through what you guys are part of is the North American Transportation Management Institute training courses. So you obviously partnered there with some training. Maybe walk us through what that's all about.
Yeah, so there's a couple different programs. So this one's called Certified Driver Trainer. It's a 2-day course, either in person or virtual. Right now we have 13 people signed up for it, all in person so far. We've partnered with KRTS. And the safety dog, Chris Harris, who will be facilitating it. They're going to be Volvo, a member of ours, has donated their space for the in-person class to happen in Mississauga. It's happening on October 18th and 19th. We have 1 spot left to fill it, and we can take virtuals, but there's only 1 spot left for in-person. Gotcha. It's basically a train the trainer program for driver trainers that are working within your fleet. We're going to manage a safety program, going to help train your drivers, help train your mentors, those types of things. So it's basically to teach somebody who has the knowledge how to pass that knowledge on and develop lesson plans, whether it be in class or out on the road.
That's smart, because I know a lot of fleets will have, especially you get to sizable private fleets, you usually have an in-house, some sort of trainer as someone on boards, right? Get them used to the company procedures, but it's having some sort of generic framework around that they can, keep in line with, and it helps streamline and make sure everyone's kind of trained the correct way.
Well, and it's also important to make sure that the person that's going to be delivering the knowledge is actually comfortable to deliver it, because not everybody wants to be a trainer, or not everybody is built to be a trainer. Sure. I started out as a driver after 8 years of long haul. I come off the road to become a driver trainer when we opened up a driving school, and I went through a 4-week program, the same that the students were going to go through. At KRTS, funny enough, as it was back 25 years ago. And the purpose of it opened my eyes. I had all the knowledge. I had to learn how to get it from here out to there. True. In a way that the drivers could understand it. Because telling somebody, well, when you back up, you're going to turn the wheel to the left. And if they ask you why, your answer can't be, well, because that's what you need to do. Right. You have to figure out how to get the information out of your head to theirs. And that course was invaluable to me. You can't just take somebody who's drove for years and say, go teach, without teaching them how to teach. Right. As weird as that sounds, but having the knowledge and knowing how to get the knowledge out there properly in a way that people understand are two totally different things.
That's a good point. That's how it's communicated, right? So people can absorb it and understand it. And I agree with you. You understand that you do something for a certain reason, but you have to explain it. And you just know that from knowledge and years of experience, and they'll get there too as well. Yeah. But initially, right, to try and explain it and having someone explain to you, here's how to break it down, here's how to present it, here's how to, walk through the process, and it'll help it versus just, the old school way may have been like, that's just what it does, move on, right, kind of thing. Yeah. So it's always good to go in a little bit in depth and help explain out to the guys that need a bit more explanation. So that's a good one. And then out west, you've got some activity going on out west. Maybe fill us in on the west.
Yeah,
a
few
coast.
Things. I mean, first thing we've got, as you know, we have our conference here every year in June, but then we have an in-person seminar out west, usually in the fall. We have one in the East Coast, usually in spring, and we have another one in Ontario in January. So we're continuing with that habit. We're going to be in Calgary on November 16th for a half-day seminar, starting at 8 in the morning, going until 12:30. In the afternoon, we're providing people with breakfast and lunch afterwards. Going to have some opening remarks. Then we actually have a couple officials from the government of Alberta. Workforce Supports is going to be there. Alberta Jobs, Economy and Trade, to speak about the support programs that are in place for the trucking industry. Then we're going to have Malcolm Mullum there from Alberta Transportation and Economic Corridors, and he's going to talk about motor carrier compliance and what the province is looking for. We're going to have Terry Johnson from the Alberta Motor Transport Association. Is going to do a brief chat on zero-emission vehicles in the heavy-duty transportation sector. We have a guy from Enviro Apps. He's going to talk about TDG, digital documents. Canada Transport of Dangerous Goods is trying to move away from paper-based document into using digital-based documents where it's a little easier for officers to grab it. You imagine if a truck's on fire and it's burning, it's not always easy to get into the truck cab and get the paperwork. But if there's an app they can go to where it's digital, then they can access it from anywhere. So
Makes sense.
We're going to talk about that. And then we're going to have a panel with 3 fleet members on it and a moderator from the compliance industry. And they're just going to talk about fleet safety programs at work. So they're each one of them is going to talk about 10 minutes talking about a program that they've put in place that works. And then we're going to have about a 40-minute moderated panel after that where they delve into them a little bit more.
I like those panels, especially you get the fleet owners in. And I like for 2 reasons, because, they're sharing knowledgeable experience, which may be beneficial to anybody, right? From a safety point of view. There's lots you can pick up on there, but then the moderation back and forth usually opens up a whole bunch more. And I like it because you get a lot of smaller carriers that don't have maybe a safety team or don't have a safety, obviously they have to follow safety procedures, but they're small outfits, so they don't have a set division to it. So this is a great way for them to learn and pick up some knowledgeable things to take back to their fleet and obviously, run a safer environment. So those panels are great. I like those.
And the trucking industry is usually pretty good at sharing that information.
That information they'll share. Yeah.
Maybe not competitive bid prices or anything,
exactly.
But safety. I mean, anything that can help make the road safer makes it safer for every one of the trucking companies that are out there operating as well, right? So
I agree. Yeah, I run in everyone's best interest for sure. Yeah. And on the East Coast, back Ontario, Quebec, what other new things have you've seen?
Well, there's one thing I'll get into just before we move out of the West.
Sure.
Is PMTC, as you probably saw, we are expanding. We are hiring a consultant to represent our members' views and interests out in the western part of the country. Right. So that person, we hope to have them in place in time for our seminar out in Alberta, where we can announce them. It'll be a part-time contract position for now. It's basically because right now I'm the one that pretty much does the lobbying in the education portion for the PMTC, and it's a little tough to we've been doing it, but it's a little tough to represent 10 provinces and 2 territories by yourself and get out there and probably put the time and effort into it you need. So we're hiring somebody. We're going to start in the Western region. They'll represent us in those 4 provinces. I said part-time consultant role at this time, but they will be contracted to the PMTC to represent our members' views and interests. We think it's important to have boots on the ground out there. They can go meet our existing members, go meet some potential members, really find out what their pain points are out in the 4 Western provinces, and then make sure their interests are being represented. And of course, with having somebody there, it also gives us the opportunity to work with the government a little bit more out there when you have somebody right in that region to do the consulting and acting on behalf of our members. So that's a big step for us that we said we'll hopefully be have somebody in place by the middle of November. So
nice. That'll be helpful because, like I said, it's a lot of the carriers are national but there are a lot of regional carriers that are private fleets as well or just fleets in general. Right? Yeah. I know you guys will work with everybody, but it's I mean the West, Ontario, Quebec, Maritimes, everyone has sort of a different kind of go-to the work strategy that works for them. There's different regulations that, for each area. So someone, like I said, close to the ground, ear to ground, boots on the ground definitely helps kind of, lead the initiatives of what you guys do and bring stuff to your attention. Say, here's what I'm hearing that you wouldn't necessarily hear, because you're not out there every day. Right.
Exactly.
So it's good. So that'll be nice to have for you guys for sure.
For sure. And hopefully expand our presence and membership base out there at the same time, right?
Definitely.
Maybe bring more events out to that way as well. A couple other things, the Quebec Safety Index rating, and this one's really in its infancy, but something that has raised some alarm bells within our association. So the province is planning to develop what they call a safety index, which is going to create a technical standard, which they plan to have published by November of 2024 through the Quebec Standards Bureau. Basically, what this safety rating index is for is it's going to put in place a system that scales the truck itself and how it is built to safely operate around and protect vulnerable road users. So pedestrians, cyclists. Now that all sounds like a great thing, and it is. Anything that protects a vulnerable road user, we're all for. Anything that protects anybody out on the highway, we're all for. And they say it's going to be voluntary at the start. But our concern is things that start out voluntary usually don't stay that way.
Correct.
And basically what this would do, this safety rating index, will take in considerations like a driver's field of vision. Field of vision out front, indirect vision through mirrors, the safety impact of the vehicle itself, alarms, lights, sensors that will detect vulnerable road users, side underride guards. And if your index rating isn't high enough, you would then have to upgrade your vehicle before you could enter the province. Now, if it stays voluntary, it's voluntary. So
right.
you don't have to. But if it gets to a point where it becomes mandatory, you're going to create a mess.
Yeah.
What you're going to do when you have one jurisdiction doing something totally different than somebody else. A manufacturer is not going to build a truck that meets the safety rating index for one province.
Correct.
Out of Canada and the U.S., right? Because most of these trucks, keep in mind, too, are also built in the States.
Yep.
If it doesn't meet the proper index rating, then they're talking about then you're going to have to add things to your truck to increase the index rating, whether that be cameras, whether that be sensors, alarms, underride guards. But anyway, it would have to have an index rating high enough that it could allow it to travel inside the province. Now, they're saying it'll come in voluntary, like I said, but then other jurisdictions, municipalities within the province could choose to adopt this. Now, imagine if the city of Montreal adopts it. So to go into Montreal, you have to adopt the rating. If Quebec City puts it, then you have to have the rating to go in there. It's going to cause a couple issues. One is, how is everybody going to comply with this?
Right.
Two, if it does become mandatory, how many carriers are just going to say, we're not going to deliver loads into the province of Quebec, which now increases the costs for freight to be delivered in and out of that province. Now, again, right now they're saying it's voluntary. It's very early stages. They plan to have the standard published in November 2024, but we always get a little concerned when somebody tries to go their own route without consultation with other jurisdictions to see what they're going to do.
Yeah. Right
Right now they have a committee put to place. They're only having representatives on it from in Quebec, and we're a national association, so We weren't on the committee. We're doing what we can to make sure our opinion is heard going forward before the standards get in. But it's just something that it's off in the distance, but it's something that we're keeping an eye on.
No, and it's good to know, right? Because that's, again, if it's off at a distance, it's in Quebec specifically, carriers even around the border, once you get to the western part of Canada, it may not even be on the radar, but, a lot of these fleets do go in and out of Quebec, seamlessly at this point. And, that could be a huge concern. And, from our end on the OEM side, yeah, I agree with you. For the volume of trucks they produce that get, that run through Quebec. I mean, running through is one, domicile out of another is, so you got two different things going on. But I agree with you to try and get them to, CARB has been enough of a battle. Yeah. And that's one state. Now the state's almost the size of Canada. So there's a bit of a size discrepancy. But even that with the OEMs has taken so long to just try and get it to a point where it's manageable, where you can actually make things happen. Right. Yeah. So at the size of Quebec is, that's going to be a bigger uphill climb. Right initiative, and maybe hopefully, they bring in the right, national partners like yourself and other or associations that can lend an ear and say, look, here's where we are, here's what we have today. So maybe there's technology there that, isn't going to be too drastic. Maybe it is, blind spot monitoring, lane keep assist, different things that already exist. And it's just a matter of having those, which again, there's a cost to it. So you gotta be careful. And they've had the trailer idea for quite a while, it's never really kind of fully come up. Or even on straight trucks, same idea, right? So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they try and adapt, and then what is the feedback and pushback from that. So it's good to know it's potentially coming.
Well, in the side underride guard that you brought up there, Bruce, the issue we've always had with it, because side underride guards have been brought up in Canada before. They're a big discussion in the U.S. right now. Mm-hmm. They don't work well in snow. Right, that's the issues with them. It's not really an issue running around in the summer, but when you got a couple of feet of snow on the road, a side underguard guard can cause all sorts of safety issues and concerns.
Yes, yeah, that's a good point. And even though the technology, the radar technology on that, the cameras, again, snow, right? If you're on the highway and it's blowing snow, they don't work, right? Yeah. And they tell you they're disabled, so you go back to your eyes. So, again, it's a good point, but these are things that they're going to have to consider, and they get hit pretty hard with some snow. So, so that can definitely be a challenge.
Despite the changing climate, we still do get snow here.
Yes, exactly. And speaking of places that don't get snow, you had mentioned this was an interesting one when we were chatting. Again, the same thing, not in our backyard, but a lot of carriers run down into the southern U.S., and Texas has got a big port down there. Maybe some rumblings going on in Texas. What's happening?
Yeah, so the law actually came into effect on September 1st, so about a month ago. And it's to aid enforcement efforts to combat illegal truck driving in the state, specifically an issue with fake driver's licenses. There's been a big issue down there with, believe it or not, cartel members getting fake licenses, getting people up here, and they're using it as a way to transport drugs and other items. So the law was really brought in to deal with the fake driver's license issue that's happening in Mexico coming into the U.S. But the law wasn't written specific to Mexico. And the law states individuals holding a valid Mexican or Canadian commercial driver's license, they have to possess a U.S. government-issued work visa when operating in Texas. The law began September 1st. It's a 90-day grace period, so nobody's getting fined right now. We have not heard of any of our member drivers or any other Canadian drivers being stopped and asked to provide proof of a work visa yet. But the law does state this could be asked for. We're having discussions with associations south of the border, talked to the NPTC on it, National Private Truck Council, others, trying to understand what is going to happen to a Canadian driver out of this law the way it is. From what we've understood, because of the rules that are in place that basically allow a Canadian driver to go into the U.S. anyway and not have to have a work visa, if a Canadian driver is operating in the States, has a valid Canadian license, has their valid passport on it or valid work visa from whichever country they came to land as an immigrant in Canada, or have their FAST or Nexus card, we're told that those documents will satisfy the requirement in Texas, and you should be okay. However, we're still trying to get 100% verification and proof of this, so we're still working through our channels to make sure that is the case. But we're being told that is the case. It is, if you're a Canadian driver with a valid license and have either that Canadian passport or the Faster Nexus card, that basically allows you to operate in the U.S. Anyway, to pick up, deliver a load from Canada into the States and then pick up a load in the States and come back. And as long as you meet those requirements, like I said, you should be fine, but we don't like should, so we're still reaching out, trying to find out for sure that this is how it's going to happen. But I said to date, I know there was a lot of concern. We had a few people reach back to our office that are concerned about it. So far, we haven't heard of anybody getting charged. And like I said, we're continuing to follow up to see if we can get some official clarity on this law.
That's good to know. Yeah, because I'd heard of it, and those ones, kind of like you said before, A to shoulds are never a good legal legal backing.
No,
but there's also the slippery slope of what works for one state works for another, which works for another, and then all of a sudden you have a whole bunch of states where if this is the course they're going, again, this creates another slippery slope for commuting in and out of there from a work point of view. Costs, everything just becomes a little crazy. I get the spirit of what they're trying to do, and I agree. And it'll probably get cleaned up, from a wording point of view. But when it's gray, it's never good when it's gray. So.
Well, and another good legal defense I've never found is, well, someone told me.
Yeah,
that usually doesn't work well either.
Someone told me it should be okay. It doesn't hold it in court. Fair, but yeah. So we'll keep an eye on that. We'll probably touch base with you again and get an update on that. But I appreciate you coming in and giving us a huge update on everything that's going on within the industry here and in the States. It's been very beneficial to us.
Well, appreciate you having me on again. It's always good to get together and have these chats. So I appreciate it.
Agreed. So make sure everyone goes to your website to sign up for all the events you have coming. Get in before all the spaces are gone for the ones that are limited, and make it to the conference next year. So again, thanks for coming out and chatting with us today. Well, that concludes today's episode. I do want to thank Mike from the PMTC for joining us, and to catch up on past episodes, check out transportationexchangepodcast.ca. And until next time, thanks for listening.